December 17, 1944. At 0530 hours near Hansfeld, Belgium, the powerful roar of a Tiger tank abruptly gave way to silence. The massive engine coughed, sputtered, and died. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper hammered his fist against a metallic turret hatch, the sharp clang echoing through the dense, pre-dawn darkness. Below him, his driver, Anders Scharfer of Baer, wrestled futilely with the starter motor of the 700-horsepower Maybach engine. The verdict from the compartment was chillingly clear. The fuel gauge was empty and the reserve tank was dry. Peiper descended onto the frozen Belgian ground, his boots crushing the icy soil. Around him, the most formidable armored spearhead the Wehrmacht had committed to Operation Watch on the Rhine. The desperate Ardennes Offensive sat utterly motionless. 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's most elite Waffen-SS soldiers were rendered inert, betrayed by the catastrophic failure of the Reich's logistics. Through the dissipating morning mist, Peiper observed the abandoned American positions ahead. Hansfeld, a crucial forward supply depot for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division, had been evacuated in haste. The speed of the American retreat was evidenced by the still-burning oil drums and the untouched hot coffee steaming in metal cups. And there, laid out before the stalled German column like an impossible gift from the god of war, were endless rows of distinctive olive-drab American fuel containers. Peiper approached the stockpile with slow, almost reverent caution. His adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruller, pried open a container and confirmed the contents: high-octane gasoline. Immediately, Peiper's men began the frantic work of siphoning this unexpected bounty. Peiper walked among the stores, counting the staggering yield: 50,000 gallons. This was enough fuel to propel his entire Kampfgruppe toward the critical objective of the Meuse River, potentially altering the entire outcome of the offensive. The Americans had carelessly abandoned more fuel in this single depot than most German divisions had received through their official supply lines in the preceding 6 months. As Peiper watched his soldiers pour American fuel into the hungry German machines, confronted by the sheer volume of abandoned American tanks and equipment, a crushing realization settled over the German officer like a shroud of inevitable failure. If the United States could afford to simply discard such vast quantities of material, resources that Germany would dedicate entire divisions to guard, then the conflict was fundamentally decided. Germany had not merely miscalculated the timeline of the war. It profoundly misunderstood the industrial and logistical nature of its enemy. 6 months prior to Peiper's discovery at Hansfeld in June 1944, the gravity of this industrial asymmetry had been laid bare. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had delivered a chilling report to the Führer, one that should have mandated the immediate cessation of all major offensive operations. The systematic destruction wrought by Allied bombing had crippled Germany's synthetic fuel production, the very lifeblood of the Wehrmacht. The critical Launau works, which had generated a vital 175,000 tons of fuel in April, was producing a mere 5,000 tons by September. Crucial hydrogenation plants at Politz, Blechhammer, and Brucks were functioning at less than 10% capacity. The global numbers offered an undeniable verdict of defeat. In 1944, the United States poured forth 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, including all synthetic output and captured Romanian fields, could muster only 33 million barrels, less than 2% of American production. The Third Reich was attempting to prosecute a modern, mechanized war while relying on logistical support that was increasingly horse-drawn. While America was drowning its armies in petroleum abundance, Major Friedrich Simman of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Command calculated that the Ardennes Offensive alone would require 4.5 million gallons of fuel simply to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 5 million gallons, yet transportation failures ensured that only half was actually delivered. The German High Command staked the entire offensive on the desperate strategy of capturing enemy supplies, a maneuver that broadcast terminal weakness rather than strength. Simultaneously, the Americans had established a formidable logistical infrastructure, including the Pluto pipeline under the ocean, system across France, and the massive Red Ball express truck convoy, which delivered 12,500 tons of critical supplies to the front lines daily. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were consuming While the American logistical machine was consuming 1.2 million gallons of fuel daily and receiving 1.4 million, steadily accumulating strategic reserves even while engaged in active combat, the German spearhead faced a catastrophic shortage. The man tasked with this impossible mission was SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper. At just 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, a highly decorated veteran of the Eastern Front, holding the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords. Peiper understood a brutal lesson learned in Russia. In mechanized warfare, petroleum was more precious than high-explosive shells. His battle group had been designated the Schwerpunkt, the decisive cutting edge of the entire Ardennes Offensive. 2 days before the attack, on December 14th, Peiper attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th SS Panzer Army, was brutally clear. Reaching the Meuse River was contingent entirely upon the capture of American supply depots. The mathematics of failure were already etched into the operational plan. Peiper's official fuel allocation was a mere 31,000 gallons, enough for perhaps 50 miles of combat maneuvering. The distance of the Meuse, however, was 65 miles. As his column prepared to advance on December 16th, Peiper issued strict, almost desperate, orders to conserve every drop. Tanks would operate in single file. Engines were to be shut off immediately during any halt exceeding 5 minutes. The capture of American fuel dumps was designated Priority 1, superseding even tactical objectives. The contrast with the Allied position could not have been starker. That same morning, Captain James Rose of the U.S. 743rd Tank Battalion, positioned barely 20 miles from Peiper's staging area, recorded a telling entry in his unit diary. Received fuel resupply 8,000 gallons. Third delivery this week. Storage tanks already at capacity. At 0530 hours on December 16th, 1944, the German artillery barrage opening Operation Watch on the Rhine was immense, expending more ammunition in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had sometimes allocated for entire campaigns earlier in the war. Yet, even this impressive display masked critical shortages. Peiper's column began moving at 7 a.m., already struggling to maintain the schedule. The roads, which German planners optimistically marked as major highways, quickly proved to be narrow, often unpaved country lanes. Within hours, the inevitable traffic jams began to develop. The heavy German fighting vehicles, engineered primarily for the wide expanse of the Russian steppes, immediately struggled to navigate the treacherous, narrow tracks of the Ardennes forest. This inherent inefficiency became critical at Lanzarote, Peiper's initial objective, where his armored column was brought to an unanticipated standstill. They encountered fierce, unexpected resistance from a mere 18 men, a single American intelligence and reconnaissance platoon, who successfully held the most powerful German armored spearhead immobile for nearly 10 hours. This devastating delay forced Peiper's vehicles to sit idling, consuming irreplaceable fuel reserves. When the column finally broke through and reached Hansfeld at dawn on December 17th, they had covered barely 20 miles, yet had already expended 40% of their remaining fuel. At this catastrophic rate, the Meuse MOS now seemed an impossible distance. Hansfeld was not a primary target. It was merely a forward supply point for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division, classified by the Army as a temporary Class 3B depot. Yet, what the Germans discovered there revealed the staggering scale of the American war machine. Führer Hans Grower later provided testimony detailing the find. We found pyramids of jerry cans, each containing 5 gallons of gasoline. They were stacked 3 meters high, extended for perhaps 200 meters. The Americans had not even attempted to destroy this bounty, a volume of fuel that surpassed the monthly allocation for an entire German panzer division. Ironically, the captured gasoline, a mixture of high-octane aviation and motor fuel, 80 octane or higher, was actually too potent. The temperamental Maybach engines powering the formidable German Tiger tanks were calibrated for 74-octane fuel, and a superior American product immediately began causing mechanical failure in several German vehicles. As Peiper's men refueled, they made a discovery far more chilling than the fuel itself. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann, fluent in English from his pre-war import business, located shipping manifests in the depot office. These documents meticulously traced the fuel's logistical odyssey. From its origin in Texas, across the Atlantic via New York and Liverpool, across the Channel to Normandy, and finally trucked 400 miles to Hansfeld, a journey of over 6,000 miles completed in less than 6 weeks. I showed the papers to Obergruppenführer Peiper. Hoffman recalled in a 1976 interview. He read them twice, then crumpled them up. He said nothing, but his face went pale. We both understood what this meant. The sheer, undeniable proof of America's industrial capacity had been laid bare. The sheer scale of Allied industrial might was laid bare for the desperate German attackers. When Private Ernst Karrer retrieved a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers, dated December 15th, the headline itself was a monument to American logistical superiority. It celebrated the operational launch of a new fuel pipeline stretching from Cherbourg to Verdun, boasting a daily capacity of 300,000 gallons. A single Allied convoy was delivering more daily fuel than the entire offensive under Peiper was expected to consume. To fully grasp the magnitude of this shock, one must recall Germany's catastrophic fuel situation by late 1944. Since May, relentless Allied aerial bombardment had decimated synthetic fuel production by a staggering 90%. The once mighty Luftwaffe was now forced to ground aircraft due to the lack of aviation gasoline, and pilot training had been ruthlessly slashed from 250 flight hours to a mere 60. The surface fleet of the German Navy had effectively ceased movement, while U-boats were hastily fitted with snorkels, conserving precious diesel by relying on battery power for extended periods. On the home front, private automobile traffic had vanished from German roads since 1942. Gasoline was so critically scarce that the Gestapo dedicated resources to investigating the black market theft of individual liters, forcing farmers back to the obsolescence of horse-drawn plows. This resource famine stood in stark relief against the American colossus, which reduced 67% of the world's oil supply. The East Texas oil field alone yielded more petroleum than all of German-occupied Europe combined, fueling an industrial capacity so vast that American refineries were experimenting with new petroleum byproducts simply to manage the excess crude. Bolstered by the 50,000 gallons capture at Hansfeld, Peiper's column surged forward, reaching the town of Billingen by noon on December 17th. Here, they secured additional critical supplies, rations, and ammunition, but most importantly, captured maps detailing the location of other American fuel depots. The maps revealed a disturbing truth. The Americans had established colossal fuel stockpiles at virtually every major crossroads. The U.S. First Army alone maintained a staggering 3.5 million gallons in reserve. Pushing toward Lineville, this fuel desperation culminated in the infamous Malmédy massacre, where Peiper's forces executed 84 American prisoners. The war crime itself was inextricably linked to the crisis. Peiper later coldly claimed he could not justify sparing the gasoline required to transport the captured soldiers to the rear. By the evening of December 17th, the armored spearhead of Camp Peiper reached Stavalo, the vital location of a major American fuel depot. This facility held a staggering 2,189,000 gallons of high-octane gasoline, sufficient reserves to guarantee the German column could reach the Meuse River and maintain the momentum of the offensive. Yet, as the first German vehicles approached, American engineers were already executing a scorched earth policy. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had received stern warning of the imminent German arrival, and his orders were absolute: deny the enemy this critical fuel at all costs. The Stavalo depot was a colossal staging ground, containing millions of gallons in jerrycans stacked across 15 sprawling acres. At 16:30 on December 17th, just as Peiper's advance guard came within range, Captain Brewster issued the irrevocable command. Engineers swiftly poured gasoline trails between the immense stacks, and white phosphorus grenades were distributed. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis threw the first grenade into the volatile mixture. The resulting explosion was immediate and cataclysmic, Solis later recalling a terrifying wall of fire that shot up perhaps 100 feet. Within minutes, the entire depot was transformed into an apocalyptic inferno. Peiper's lead tanks arrived not to vital supplies, but to a vast pillar of dense black smoke rising 1,000 feet into the sky, a monument to American defiance. The fire would rage uncontrollably for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered Peiper's entire division to Antwerp and back again. One Obersturmführer described the desolate scene. The commander stood silently on his tank turret, watching the flames for 5 minutes before grimly stating, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons to deny them to us. What truly are we doing here?" This destruction was systemic. Across the Ardennes, American engineers were systematically destroying fuel dumps rather than risk capture. At Tuapan, 1.1 million gallons burned, and at Spar, 2.5 million gallons were obliterated. In total, American forces deliberately destroyed over 8 million gallons during the offensive's first week, a quantity that exceeded Germany's entire petroleum allocation for the operation. The ability to casually destroy millions of gallons underscored a logistical reality utterly beyond German comprehension. The legendary Red Ball Express had delivered 412,000 tons of supplies, using 6,000 trucks operating round-clock, with each truck consuming 40 gallons daily. The supply operation itself burned more fuel than German Army Group be possessed for its entire strategic thrust. By December 1944, the logistical engine of the Allied war effort was operating at a scale unprecedented in military history. The meticulously managed motor transport service employed 230 truck companies, relying on a system of color-coded routes to deliver over 20,000 tons of supplies daily, including 3,000 tons of vital motor fuel. This capacity ensured continuous operational readiness. Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for the U.S. First Army, recorded the strategic health of the supply chain on December 18th. Fuel receipts yesterday 1,847,000 gallons. Fuel issued 1,623,000 gall. Net gain to reserves 224,000 gall. Simultaneously, the pipeline network represented an act of engineering audacity. Operation Pluto, having laid pipes beneath the English Channel, pumped 1 million gallons of fuel daily from Britain, supplemented by an extensive inland network. The Cherbourg-Paris line alone delivered 800,000 gallons daily, while the Sun line moved another 650,000 gallons. Crucially, by December 1944, Allied forces in Northwest Europe were consuming 7.5 million gallons daily, yet receiving 8.2 million gallons, meaning they were actively building strategic reserves even amidst major offensive operations. As Camp Peiper pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18th, the fatal impossibility of the German position became acutely clear. Though they captured a depot near La Gleize, consuming 5,000 gallons in just 3 hours of combat, the German consumption rates were unsustainable. A Tiger tank burned 2.5 gallons per mile in battle, while the lighter Panther consumed 1.5 gallons per mile, rates which increased by an estimated 40% in the difficult, icy Ardennes terrain. Otto Dingler, maintenance officer for 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded the crippling deficit. By noon on December 18th, we had consumed 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We had captured perhaps 55,000 gallons. We were operating at a deficit. American intelligence, monitoring German radio traffic through ultra-intercepts, knew Peiper's fuel crisis was terminal. General Courtney Hodges immediately ordered all units. Enemy critically short of fuel. Destroy all gasoline stocks threatened by capture. That same day, American C-47 transport planes flew 316 sorties, delivering supplies to the surrounded garrison at Bastogne, including 160,000 gallons of aviation fuel. The Americans were flying more fuel to a single besieged town than Peiper's entire combat group possessed. By December 19th, as Peiper's forces engaged offenders at Stillmont, the fuel crisis had become critical. Tanks were being. The abandoned tanks littering the Ardennes forest provided a stark visual testament to the true cause of collapse. Vehicles were abandoned with empty fuel tanks rather than catastrophic battle damage. Camp Peiper, now effectively stranded, had consolidated his remaining reserves, a meager 8,000 gallons, sufficient for either a final, desperate engagement or a difficult retreat, but definitively not both. This paralyzing scarcity existed in profound contrast to the supply lines of the Western Allies. As Peiper measured his resources by the leader, Allied planners prepared for January operations. Brigadier General Morris Gillen's request for 245 million gallons for the coming month was approved without discussion, highlighting the logistical chasm between the two forces. The disparity extended far beyond mere quantity. It was rooted in industrial standardization. American efficiency was ruthless. The reliable Sherman tank consumed just 0.8 gallons per mile, dwarfed by the heavy Tiger's thirst of 2.5 gallons per mile. Furthermore, American trucks, achieving 8 miles per gallon fully loaded, utilized interchangeable parts, simplifying maintenance across the theater. German forces, conversely, struggled under a logistical nightmare, operating a bewildering array of captured and manufactured vehicles. French tanks required different lubricants than German Panthers, and Soviet trucks demanded parts incompatible with German Opels, multiplying logistical difficulties exponentially. The final blow arrived on December 20th when Peiper received a stark radio message confirming the vital fuel convoy had been destroyed by Allied aircraft, making resupply impossible. When Peiper called the commanders together, Sturmbannführer Vera Pertke was blunt, estimating fuel for perhaps 20 kilometers, while the objective, the Meuse, lay 30 kilometers distant. According to the later testimony of H.T. Müller-Gruller, the Oberscharmbannführer articulated the devastating realization. Gentlemen, we have discovered we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we receive for this entire operation. What we captured at Hansfeld, which seemed miraculous, was nothing to them. We cannot win. This cold realization was spreading throughout the German High Command. General Otto von Manifold, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, later wrote, "When I learned Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons rather than risk our capturing it, I knew the offensive had failed before it began." The futility was captured perfectly by Colonel Friedrich von Donder, captured December 23rd, who told interrogators, "Your soldiers throw away chocolate. My men haven't seen chocolate in 2 years. You burn millions of gallons. We measure by the liter. How can we fight such abundance?" By December 21st, Peiper was completely surrounded at Lays, his tanks utterly immobile, ringed by American forces, including the 31st. The combined operational requirement of the infantry division, the 82nd Airborne, and the 3rd Armored alone necessitated a fuel allocation of 340,000 gallons for December 21st. Camp Peiper, by stark contrast, possessed perhaps 1,000 gallons. The logistical disparity was vividly captured by Private First Class Richard McKinney, who wrote home, "We got Germans surrounded who ran out of gas. Our captain jokes we use more fuel heating coffee than they have for tanks." The American response was the apotheosis of industrial warfare. General Patton's 3rd Army pivot north, a maneuver considered impossible by German standards of military mobilization, required 350,000 gallons of fuel purely for redeployment, yet was accomplished in a mere 3 days. December 23rd brought the decisive shift. Clear weather. Allied aircraft immediately flew 2,000 sorties, consuming fuel at rates that would have grounded the entire Luftwaffe for weeks. P-47s consumed 300 gallons per hour, and B-20Xs burned 200 gallons hourly. One single day's air operations consumed more fuel than Germany's entire offensive allocation. On the night of December 23rd to 24th, Peiper abandoned his immobilized vehicles and escaped on foot. Of the 119 tanks and assault guns that spearheaded the offensive, 39 remained operational but lacked the fuel to move. These were systematically destroyed with remaining ammunition. Oberleutnant Heinz Gauls described the bitter finale. "We drained the last fuel from all vehicles, maybe 200 gallons total." The Obersturmbannführer personally destroyed his command tank. Millions of Reichsmarks of equipment rendered useless by empty fuel tanks. Of the 5,000 men who began with Camp Peiper, approximately 770 returned. They had advanced 60 miles, captured several depots, and discovered the undeniable truth about Allied industrial logistics. News of Peiper's discovery spread rapidly through the German command. On December 26th, Field Marshal Walter Model received reports detailing captured American supplies. His chief of staff recorded Model's stunned reaction. The field marshal read the quantities twice. 50,000 gallons at Hansfeld, 2 million burned at Stavalo, 8 million destroyed rather than captured, and concluded, "We are not fighting the same war." Hitler, informed on December 28th, refused to accept this reality. Albert Speer noted that Hitler insisted the numbers were propaganda, and when shown photographs of the burning fuel dumps at Stavalo, he claimed the images were mere Hollywood effects. The grim reality of the war's end was acutely understood by the German lower ranks. Corporal Greer Wilhelm Hoffmann, writing to his wife, captured the systemic collapse. Americans destroy more fuel daily than we receive monthly. They drive tanks like we march. This war is lost. The fuel crisis was not merely a logistical bottleneck. It was the ultimate symptom of an insurmountable industrial disparity. By 1944, the United States commanded 50% of global manufacturing capacity, a relentless industrial engine that produced a new aircraft every 5 minutes, a ship daily, and a tank every 7 minutes. The petroleum statistics alone were overwhelming. The United States produced 1.8 billion barrels, dwarfing the Soviet Union's 110 million, Germany's 33 million, even including synthetic fuels, and Japan's mere 2.6 million barrels. Combined, the Axis powers produced less than 2% of American petroleum output. This chasm defined the battlefield. While every major German offensive after 1942 was fundamentally constrained by the lack of gasoline, every American counteroffensive was supported by a sheer abundance that German planners could not even conceive. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Hansen recorded a revealing incident on December 27th, where a logistics officer expressed concern that poor weather had reduced daily fuel deliveries to only 500,000 gallons. The anxiety instantly vanished when someone pointed out that this reduced delivery volume still exceeded Germany's total operational allocation for the entire Western Front offensive. German prisoners of war captured during the Ardennes were often more profoundly shocked by American waste than by their firepower. Witnessing GIs casually discard half-eaten rations or use high-octane gasoline purely for heating shattered morale more effectively than artillery barges. As Ausg. Reichelm told interrogators, "We knew your production numbers abstractly, but seeing soldiers waste more than we possessed made them real. Every German who saw your casual abundance knew the war was hopeless." This devastating knowledge spread rapidly through letters circumventing censorship. Feldwebel Ernst Muller wrote despairingly, "Americans wash clothes in gasoline. They feed chocolate to dogs. They fire artillery for Christmas. We cannot fight infinity." This glaring, undeniable disparity, that decadent Americans could possess such inexhaustible wealth while the self-proclaimed master race scraped for necessities, fatally undermined the German racial superiority narratives. It is why, during the subsequent Nuremberg trials, German military leaders consistently cited logistics, and particularly a profound lack of fuel, as the single most decisive factor in their defeat. Field Marshal Kittel starkly summarized a catastrophic shift in fortune. We had operational superiority in 1940 to 41. By 1944, we couldn't move forces for lack of fuel, while Americans moved armies like chess pieces. This paralysis defined the late war. Testimony offered by SS Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Peiper, tried for the Malmédy massacre, revealed the tactical consequence. Every decision after December 17th was influenced by fuel shortage. We couldn't maneuver, pursue, or retreat effectively. While German tankers counted leaders, American forces moved freely. General Heinz Darien captured the futility perfectly. When Peiper captured 50,000 gallons, meaning everything to him but nothing to Americans, the war was over. This narrative resonates because it marks a conclusive moment when industrial warfare decided the conflict. The romantic notion of warrior courage died in the Ardennes among empty fuel tanks. Victory was now a matter of production statistics. Dr. Richard Overy's calculations confirmed this overwhelming disparity. By 1944, the Allied to Axis production ratios exceeded 5 to 1 in major categories. In the critical arena of petroleum, this ratio approached a staggering 50 to 1. No amount of superior training or tactical skill could overcome such material advantage. The United States produced 324,750 aircraft during the war, compared to Germany's 119,097. Americans built 88,410 tanks. Germany produced 46,857. Most revealingly, America refined 1.8 billion barrels of oil in 1944 alone, while the entire German war machine scraped together just 33 million barrels. The true magnitude of this industrial chasm crystallized on December 24, 1944. As Peiper's men slipped back through American lines on foot, they were forced to abandon 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 177 other vehicles. They had seized 50,000 gallons of fuel, a haul seemingly miraculous to them, only to realize it was utterly meaningless against an enemy capable of burning millions. Onofura, reflecting in 1975, recalled the bitter irony. That morning at Hansfeld, finding American fuel, we celebrated like winning the lottery. By evening, learning about Stavalo burning, we understood we'd already lost. The Allies could afford to destroy what the Germans would die to possess. The captured 50,000 gallons was less than a single American armored division consumed in 2 days, and less than the Red Ball Express burned in just 3 hours. The failure of Operation Watch on the Rhine was not a tactical defeat, but a collapse dictated by the immutable mathematics of industrial warfare. Major General J. Lawton Collins later wrote that the desperate German attempts to capture Allied fuel depots revealed their profound miscalculation. They assumed the Americans valued fuel as they did, as an irreplaceable, finite resource. They simply could not comprehend an industrial capacity so vast that the Allies could afford to burn millions of gallons rather than risk a slight tactical disadvantage. The entire offensive consumed approximately 2.8 million gallons, representing 40% of the overall German allocation, the remainder intended to be seized from the enemy. Yet, during that exact period, American forces consumed a staggering 267 million gallons, a disparity of nearly 100-fold. The Wehrmacht lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, and 1,000 aircraft, but the most devastating casualty was the loss of illusions. Every German soldier witnessing the casual, profligate American abundance understood that Germany was no longer fighting a war, but participating in its own execution. SS Colonel Joachim Peiper, who survived imprisonment for war crimes until 1956 and was murdered by unknown assailants at his French home on July 14, 1976, articulated this psychological devastation in 1967 to historian Henry Lehman. Finding that depot was the worst thing. If we'd run out earlier, we might have retreated with dignity. Instead, we discovered Americans had oceans while we had drops. We discovered impossibility. This fundamental lesson extends beyond World War II. In industrial warfare, logistics supersedes tactics. Production overwhelms courage. Abundance defeats dedication. Though the German soldier of 1944 was arguably better trained and more experienced, it did not matter. They were pitted against an industrial machine that could waste more than the entire German state could produce. This devastating truth was encoded in every jerrycan abandoned at Hansfeld, every gallon burned at Stavalo, and every pipeline laid across France. As Colonel Trevor Dupy calculated, in December 1944, each American soldier was supported by 67 pounds of supplies daily. Each German received just 3 pounds. Americans complain about waste. Germans would have considered that waste unimaginable abundance. For decades after the desperate fighting, veterans of the Ardennes Offensive convened at Lays. Central to commemorative museum display stood the infamous Tiger tank commanded by Major Peiper, frozen precisely where it stalled, immobilized not by Allied fire, but by the absence of fuel on December 23, 1944. This location became the stage for a haunting historical revelation when former Unratia Officer Karl Wortmann encountered former Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the American 30th Infantry Division. "We always wondered why you stopped," Anderson confessed. "We thought it was a calculated tactical maneuver." Wortmann's response cut through the years of speculation with brutal clarity. "We stopped because the tanks were empty." Anderson, confronted by the harsh reality of the German collapse, paused before acknowledging the shocking disparity. "We never knew you were that short. We had so much we never thought about it." This brief, candid exchange encapsulated the profound strategic truth of December 1944. The German war machine was measuring survival by the individual jerrycan, while the Allied effort calculated expenditure in millions of gallons. Burning oceans of oil the Axis could only dream of possessing. The outcome was, in essence, predetermined by logistics. German operational records provide damning, objective evidence of this fatal imbalance. The Army Group B War Diary confirms that on December 16th, the day the offensive began, fuel reserves stood at a mere 70% of the absolute minimum requirement, though Peiper managed a temporary reprieve on December 17th. Capturing 50,000 gallons, the situation rapidly spiraled. By December 18th, multiple critical depots had been destroyed, resulting in a loss of over 5 million gallons, leading inexorably to the immobilization of fuel-critical units by December 19th. Finally, on December 24th, Peiper's advance guard was forced to abandon their precious vehicles due to complete fuel exhaustion. In stark contrast, First Army reports confirmed the staggering scale of Allied reserves. 3.7 million gallons held on December 16th. Despite 2.2 million gallons being destroyed on the 17th, 1.8 million were received the following day. By December 24th, reserves had climbed back to 4.1 million gallons. The Americans treated millions of gallons with operational indifference, while the Germans were forced to fight for every individual can. Beyond mere quantity, American fuel represented a decisive technological superiority. American refineries had perfected catalytic cracking, yielding higher octane fuels far more efficiently than the laborious German hydrogenation processes. The resultant American 100-octane aviation fuel provided Allied aircraft with critical performance advantages over German planes, which often relied on inferior 87-octane synthetic blends. Furthermore, the Americans had perfected complex additives, including tetrathild, ethylene, and diaramide detergents, that Germany could not replicate, ensuring consistent engine performance, whereas German engines, designed for lower-quality synthetics, often ran poorly or failed entirely when forced to rely on captured Allied stocks. The scarcity of American gasoline fundamentally shaped the brutal reality of every German soldier's experience. Gerrit Hans Müller recorded on December 20th a grueling 30-kilometer forced march, emphasizing the complete absence of fuel for transport trucks. The psychological toll was compounded by the sight of abandoned American vehicles, their engines often left running simply for warmth, a stark display of the logistical abundance the Germans so desperately lacked. This crisis extended far beyond tactical mobility. Medical services were utterly crippled. Ambulances could not evacuate the wounded, and essential field hospitals struggled to power generators. Men died waiting for transportation that never came. Oberar's Dr. Wilhelm Kirsting testified chillingly about the situation, stating, "We had excellent surgeons, supplies captured from Americans, but no fuel for ambulances. Men died who could have been saved with 10 kilometers transport." These grim discoveries utterly shattered the carefully constructed German propaganda narrative of American weakness. Soldiers had been indoctrinated to believe Americans were soft and incapable. Yet, they discovered an enemy capable of deploying and destroying resources far exceeding Germany's entire industrial capacity. Joseph Goebbels' diary entry of December 28th registered the internal collapse. Reports indicate serious morale problems. Soldiers write about American superiority, undermining our narrative. These stories spread faster than official censorship could contain them. The myth of inherent German superiority could not survive contact with the sheer scale of American logistics. The failure of the Ardennes Offensive was Germany's final, catastrophic gamble, leaving the regime with no strategic options save desperate defense. General Alfred Jodl testified at Nuremberg, admitting the gravity of the moment. "After the Ardennes, we knew it was lost. We played our last card and discovered the enemy held all aces." Recognizing this profound German desperation, the Allies focused their strategic bombing campaign on the very arteries of the Reich: fuel production. By February 1945, German synthetic fuel output had virtually ceased. The once feared Luftwaffe was permanently grounded. Training programs were canceled, and the Wehrmacht became an increasingly static force, destroyed piecemeal by mobile enemies. Spring 1945 brought forth surreal scenes of military paralysis. German units surrendered from total immobility, not direct defeat. Entire panzer divisions, often fully crewed and operational in terms of weaponry, sat helplessly as Allied columns drove past. General Major Fritz Baulein offered profound summation of this paralysis. "We had 42 operational tanks, experienced crews, ammunition. We had 300 liters of fuel, not enough for the next town. Their final act was to destroy their formidable tanks before walking into captivity. Meanwhile, the American advance was relentless. The American advance was often constrained not by enemy resistance, but by the sheer, overwhelming abundance of their own supplies, manifested as debilitating traffic jams. General Patton's Third Army, for instance, operated with a motorized fleet of 15,000 vehicles, a logistical beast demanding constant sustenance. The decisive factor determining the outcome of the Second World War was industrial capacity, a truth starkly illuminated by the crisis encountered by figures like Major Peiper. Standing among captured German jerrycans that December morning, Peiper glimpsed a profound reality. The Wehrmacht was fighting an enemy whose capacity for consumption and waste fundamentally exceeded its own total allocation. The statistics of scarcity versus plenty tell the entire story. While the German offensive allocation for the entire Battle of the Bulge was estimated at 5 million gallons, American forces managed to destroy 8 million gallons of enemy fuel caches. Meanwhile, the daily American consumption alone stood at 7.5 million gallons. The 50,000 gallons captured by Peiper-Hansfeld, a significant haul by German standards, represented a negligible 0.6% of the American daily supply. The Battle of the Bulge, which cost 19,000 American lives and perhaps 100,000 German casualties, successfully shattered the Wehrmacht's last strategic reserves. Yet, its most lasting impact was psychological. It spread the undeniable knowledge through German ranks that America possessed an incomprehensible, limitless abundance. Peiper's discovery at Hansfeld transcended a mere calculation of fuel. It was a realization of the nature of total industrial warfare, where victory was destined for the nation that could produce the most petroleum, steel, and aluminum. Germany, logistically, never had a chance. The final, devastating irony unfolded at Lays, where American forces, cataloging abandoned German equipment, discovered 39 perfect tanks, abandoned solely because they lacked fuel. Major Robert Harrison's subsequent salvage report underscored the absurdity. The requirement for rescue, 8,000 gallons of fuel, was classified as minimal, sourced from a local reserve, and estimated to take only 4 hours. What was an insurmountable logistical impossibility for Germans, 8,000 gallons to save their best armored assets, was a request beneath American notice, easily filled from reserves that exceeded the peak strength of Major Peiper's combat unit. This was a fundamental truth revealed to Hansfeld. American abundance operated on a scale that rendered German scarcity utterly irrelevant. The war was decided the moment American industrial capacity mobilized. Germany fought the impossible, measuring defeat in individual gallons, while America measured victory in oceans of oil. Today, a captured Tiger tank sits in the Leglas Museum, its fuel gauge empty, a silent monument to the moment tactical excellence met logistical reality and utterly failed. The simple answer to why such powerful tanks were abandoned remains: no fuel.